divorce finance is its own completely different take, whether you're talking about, financial advising in divorce or forensic accounting in divorce. It is completely different than outside of divorce realm.
If you're getting divorced and one of you has any interest in something, the court's going to assume that it's community property and they can divide it. Unless you can show, or I can show, or put on testimony, this clear and convincing evidence, not more likely than not, but definitely clear and convincing evidence that this is separate property.
I will tell people, if you are getting married, let's say second marriages, right? We see those all the time. Everyone who gets divorced, I think everyone that gets divorced says, I'm never doing this again. Okay, well, statistically, yeah, you are.
Most likely they will.
Yeah,
right?
So please, 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 please keep records. Keep records. Get a snapshot of what you own the day you get married.
And don't think your bank is going to keep them. Welcome to Divorce Decoded with Bolton Law, where we delve into everything that can go wrong in a divorce and what you can do to prevent that. So one of the first things that I thought about when I was thinking about what I wanted to cover in the podcast, some big mistakes that I have seen people make in their divorce or that I've heard about later. One of the ones that stands out the most to me is when they have accidentally let their separate property be divided in the divorce. And as an attorney, I can do a lot to help that, but I can't do it by myself. So I have a very special guest with me today. This is Denise French. She is one of the partners with SHFD Forensic. And Denise, you and I have known each other for a long time.
It's been a minute.
Yeah, in fact, we were talking before this and trying to figure out exactly when we met each other, and we couldn't remember.
It's been a while.
Yeah, so one of the things that I thought I would bring out first off is family law. Houston's one of the biggest areas, biggest metropolitan areas in the country.
Uh-huh.
You would think there'd be 10,000 divorce lawyers and it would all be strangers, right? But the family law community here, even in Houston, it is super small, isn't it?
It is very small. Everybody kind of knows everybody. You know the players, at least the main. There are a certain group of attorneys that are more well-known than others. You have your trial attorneys that are really good in court, which is the category I put you in.
Thank you.
Right. And I think the court experience, it's an art form. I do, because it's not just about the facts. It's a presentation to the court so you understand. And it takes a special breed to do that.
And I will say that's actually what makes you stand out too.
There you go.
And the reason I say that is because, if somebody just asks you, what do you do? Well, you're an accountant, right? Well, how many accountants are there in Houston?
A lot.
There's thousands. But when you're talking about somebody you're specifically a forensic accountant, right? And can you explain what that means?
Well, it's fine. Yeah, financial expert is somebody in the divorce realm who helps you figure out complex issues and put them in an expert report. So today we're talking about tracing, which is specifically something a financial expert in divorce needs to do for you.
Exactly. So if you look at the broad category of accountants, well, there's tons of them out there, but then you narrow it down to people that are qualified to actually give an opinion that know how to trace separate property. You're at a much, much smaller window. And
Agreed.
Then I will say this, if you narrow it down further to people that I want to put in a witness chair in front of a judge or in front of a jury, that I know is going to be credible and respected by the court and stand up to cross-examination, honestly, I think you're talking about maybe 6 people.
It's a small group.
Yeah.
Because it's such a niche world. Not a lot of people who do accounting or taxes are terrified of this, and they avoid it like the plague. And then you have the weird genre of people like myself and those at my firm. We kind of like it.
Yeah.
We're nuts. Yeah, we kind of like it. But it's also, divorce finance is its own completely different take, whether you're talking about, financial advising in divorce or forensic accounting in divorce. It is completely different than outside of divorce realm.
I would agree. Completely different. And just so that everybody understands, you've been my expert witness before, right?
Yes.
But you've
been
also,
opposing too.
Yeah, I was going to say more than once you've been on the other side for me, and we're friends. But I gotta say, when you're representing the other party, you don't give it an inch because I'm a friend of yours and I don't either.
Yeah, you're still representing. You are the advocate for the client. I am the advocate for my opinion, which follows the family code.
Exactly. So anyhow, I've had you on the stand as my witness, as the opposing witness, and neither one of us really quite remembers the first time. But what I thought would be really useful is the situation that I just explained where people lose their separate property in the divorce. And technically, I will tell you that the judge doesn't have the authority to give away your separate property, right? It's not something that should be able to happen. And yet, it absolutely does.
Should we define separate property?
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to go for. So, Texas is community property.
Mm-hmm. One of 9 states.
We're one of 9 community property states in the country. And that means mostly in Texas, we have a really strong, it's called a community property presumption, which means that if you're getting divorced and one of you has any interest in something, the court's going to assume that it's community property and they can divide it. Unless you can show, or I can show, or put on testimony, this clear and convincing evidence, not more likely than not, but definitely clear and convincing evidence that this is separate property.
Right.
And that's where I tend to call you, right?
Yeah. So the day you get married and you say, I do, you create a community estate. It is y'all's estate. And in Texas, every dollar that comes into the estate, whether it's income from a job, K-1s from a business, dividends from an investment account that get reinvested, or interest, that is income in the state of Texas. That is a community property in most cases. And there's extenuating cases, but
we should say there are exceptions to every rule.
But that's the genre. But if you owned something before you got married, or if you inherited or were gifted something while you were married, or God forbid, if you got into a catastrophic accident and you had a physical injury that you received money for the bodily harm part of that, that's all your separate property, and it's not to be divided, but you have to hire a financial expert firm or have some kind of evidence to say that it is separate property. The presumption is it's not.
Now, sometimes it's actually pretty easy, right? So, like, for instance, I'm not married right now, and I own a house, and that deed's in my name. Mm-hmm. If I get married,
it's your house.
I don't need an expert to prove that that's separate property. All I need is that deed. And the date of the marriage. So I guess why does it become complicated?
Oh gosh, it becomes complicated really quick.
Yeah.
So in that case, that home is her separate property. So if she gets scooped up and gets remarried, that house is her separate property. But the growth of that house is also her separate property. So if she knows that if she gets remarried, she's going to get a value of her house the month before she gets married. And she's going to have something documented in writing stating, this is the value of my home the day we got married. And then if they got divorced, not that you would, but if she got divorced down the road, it's the appreciation that's your separate property. You get the appreciation of separate, but you can't just say it's just what you have. So another great example of separate property is this. If you owned a stock before you got married, so let's say you owned a Fidelity brokerage account with ExxonMobil in it. And the day you got married, you had 100 shares, right?
Right.
Okay. So you got married with 100 shares. They were worth $50 when you got married. And now you're getting divorced. You still have that same 100 shares, but now they're worth $100. That's still your separate property. It's what you had before you got married and the appreciation of it. However, that puts off a cash dividend every quarter, right?
Right.
So that cash dividend that ExxonMobil sends off, you could buy more shares with that, but that is a cash dividend. That is community property. So what we have to do is figure out, it's often, that would be a very simple case to do. Okay, here's all the dividends, here's the growth of the dividends, no problem. But a lot of times you had a 401k before you got married. Now you've left that company and it's morphed to an IRA. It's still your separate property, but in that 401k, you had a bunch of mutual funds. Well, those mutual funds have growth, but they all have dividends and interest that they kick off. And so you've got to divvy those out and the growth of all those interest and dividends or communities. So you really have to have an expert come in and do that.
So actually, that's one thing that I wanted to talk about, because we, some of the estates that we handle are very large, and, it can very quickly add up and make up a lot of money when you do this tracing. But we also represent people that maybe don't have super large estates. So it is very, very common in the divorce world, even for two divorce attorneys at the mediation table, to say, okay, well, there was $100,000 in this 401k on the date of the marriage, and now there's $180,000 in it. Mm-hmm. And so $80,000 is community property, and your client's share of that would be $40,000. We do that all the time. Mm-hmm. We do that all the time. And I know that that's not right, because what you're saying, there could be incremental, but how long does it take? If I were to come to you and say, hey, here's this 401k that has been, that it was $100,000 on the date of the marriage, and they've been married for 10 years, and there's $180,000 in it. Can you figure out for me how much of it's separate and how much of it's community? How much would it cost, and how long would it take to really get an answer there?
I hate to say this answer, but it depends. So if it's clean, so here's the thing. If you are getting married, take a record of everything you have now and keep good records. Now, in that example, if they had just put that money in and it had stayed in the same investments and it really hadn't moved investments, it honestly would not take that long. But if they had traded, if they had bought one thing and sold another and bought something and sold another, we have to do what's called line item tracing. That means every single transaction, every single bit of interest that hits the account, every dividend that hits, we have to put that in an Excel spreadsheet by hand and manually calculate, did the dividend come before the growth? Did the growth come before the dividend? It gets very technical. So if you've traded a lot, it does take some time. And in that case, it wouldn't be worth doing, right?
Right. It isn't, because it ends up, it's going to drag out your divorce by months and months.
It wouldn't be worth it.
And it's going to end up costing thousands of dollars. And at the end, I can't even say, will it be money we find? Or will it be money?
Was it all bond fund and then you lose?
Yeah, I know. We might lose money by that. We might gain money by that, or it might come out to be pretty darn close to $100,000 as community property. And that's why it's so common. And even divorce attorneys will frequently, we won't even say, let's go hire somebody. We're going to say, look, this is the date of the marriage, and we know that, and this is now.
Yeah.
Right. And that goes on. Yeah. But I want to go back and visit the house scenario, because I actually think you misspoke a little bit. Yeah.
It's what
that house, right? The appreciation of the house. If I own my house on the date of the marriage and it's worth more, it's my separate
you keep
property.
That. Yeah.
Right. The whole thing, no matter how much
you keep the separate. Yes. You keep the growth. So it's what you have before you got married, what you were gifted or inherited, and the growth of it, the capital
remains separate property.
Is separate property.
Right,
yes.
Exactly. So if you own a home and you get married, then that home is your separate property. So Texas is what we call a title inception state, meaning that we're only going to look at one thing in determining real estate. Yes, and that is
the deed.
When you bought it,
records.
Were you married or were you not married? And in most cases, that's pretty simple.
But
or is it? Yeah.
Then you have people that, oh my God, we bought the house right before we got married,
and then the mortgage has been
enjoying
and put in a pool.
Yes.
And I got out, and and the down payment came from.
It gets complicated. It gets so complicated. Like, for example, I got married and we bought our house after we were married, but $200,000 of our house was an inheritance from my grandmother,
which is your
separate property. But we have a mixed character house because we put our money into it and we put my grandmother's money into it, which was my separate property. So now we have a mixed character. So I don't plan on getting divorced, but God forbid if I ever did, there would be quite a bit of calculations to do for that. But I did keep all my paperwork, so we're good. But we'd have to look at the value back then. We'd have to look at the value today, and we'd have to figure out which estate got the growth because both estates put money into it. So it gets complicated. I will tell people, if you are getting married, let's say second marriages, right? We see those all the time. everyone who gets divorced, I think everyone that gets divorced says, I'm never doing this again. Okay, well, statistically, yeah, you are.
Most likely they will.
Yeah,
right?
So please, 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 please keep records. Keep records. Get a snapshot of what you own the day you get married.
And don't think your bank is going to keep them. Don't do
not.
that.
You have
Don't
7
do that.
good years
Holy
with those
crap.
banks.
Yes. You're married 8 years, see, and I've got to show the court by clear and convincing evidence, and I can't get a whole year's worth of records. Wow, have you given me a headache to overcome?
And it costs more money then to figure it out.
So download your bank statement.
To a portal.
Don't count on your bank to do it.
Yes, to a portal.
Yes,
to a portal.
Download them and keep them, and they shred them. So that's one of the great thing about retirement accounts is they hold on to those records forever. I have done divorces where we had Exxon in particular. Man, they're a great employer to work with. I will say when
I love that on divorces. Yeah, I do.
I've had somebody who worked for Exxon for 36 years, and guess what? Yeah. We could absolutely see every single year, every stock that went into it, the appreciation, how much was dividends, with everything.
Yeah. Here, that brings up another point. Can I do another point?
Yeah.
Okay. So, we're in Houston, right? This applies to all Texas divorces, though, right?
Right.
So we are in an oil and gas country, and so we do a lot of ExxonMobil. Not that anything's wrong with ExxonMobil. I think it's one of the best employers in the world.
Oxy,
all of that.
Shell. Yeah. I've had clients from all these people.
They all have, well, not all, but most of the divorces we do there that you probably see too have, well, just about everybody has a pension.
Yep.
And then there's a lot of contingent assets, restricted stock units.
I'm so glad you brought those up. Yep. So I see this a lot with executives, right? Mm-hmm. That the higher pay the person is, the more likely it is that their employer is scared to lose them. And to keep from losing them, they give them all kinds of
great benefits.
Deferred compensation. Mm-hmm. So what's deferred compensation? It means you've earned it if you keep staying with us. So the Exxon or Oxy, Chevron, all of them will do this with their executives. And they will say, we're going to give you 30 shares of stock and you're going to get it in 3 years from today. And they're going to do that all the time. They'll do that like 2-3 times a year. Mm-hmm. And so what happens is if you don't have somebody who really understands divorce law and knows how executive compensation works, they're looking at a statement, and the statement, what does it say? It says that it's not there, that there's nothing there, right?
But it is.
We can divide that, yes. You might be saying, how can you divide that? We're very clever.
Yes.
No.
It's the statute. We follow their formula.
Absolutely. There is a formula, right?
There's a formula for restricted stock units and the lookalikes and stock options. There's a formula. It will be part community property to be divided. It will be part separate property. It goes into a spreadsheet, and it's a narrative of date of divorce, date of grant, and date of vest. And so the further out these vest, the more separate property. So it really depends on date of marriage, date of grant, date of vest, date of divorce. That is it's done in stock.
We see it being divided in multiple ways. So
yes.
Like, for instance, let's say somebody gets a stock grant before they get married and it vests after the marriage. And let's say they have to stay for 3 years and they get married 6 months before it vests. Well, then 5/6 of that
tiny little bit
is going to be separate property. But a little bit of that's going to be community property. Mm-hmm. So before we got started, one of the things that I said is I think the biggest problem you and I are going to have is start shop talking too much and people will be able to follow us.
Yeah.
There's so many details that can go into this.
There are.
Yeah. And one of the things that you said coming in is, well, in this situation, it wouldn't be worth it to hire me. So my question for you is, if somebody is thinking I might be getting divorced in the future, how do they know whether they're going to need somebody like you on their team?
Well, I would say the first step is hire the attorney. We have people call us directly, but honestly, I tell them all to go hire an attorney first because it depends. It depends. And your attorney, some of the stuff like these stock calculations, some of the attorneys feel comfortable doing them. Some attorneys don't feel comfortable doing them. And if a case is going to settle in mediation, it's very different. If it's super litigated and contentious and it's going to trial. At trial, you might need an expert to explain this RSG thing. And mediation, you may not. So it really depends on the facts and circumstances of the case, right?
Right. I would absolutely agree. And I'd say my own view is a lot of clients, quite honestly, people facing divorce, it is really hard for them to know when their case is complicated and when it's not complicated.
Right. I have seen people with what I would consider a super simple estate come to me just so scared because they thought it was complicated.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not.
And I've seen it the other way, too.
Yes.
Where people have unbelievable levels of complications, and there's lots of community interest, and they'll come to me and say, well, this ought to be open and shut because, it's just all separate property. And it's like,
it's not. I know. And
not
here's
really.
the other thing, too, I see people do is one, they start talking amongst yourselves, right? You know divorce is coming. So you're talking to your spouse about it. And you start talking about, you're going to take this, I'm going to take this. You're going to take this, I'm going to take this. The husband, how many times has his husband said, I'll take care of you? With well-intentioned, but you don't know what the laws are. And so don't say that, please. Whether you're the female or the male or whichever moneymaker, don't. Just don't.
I have had people come in and say, I think, if he's giving me way more than I'd get in court, I'm going to just take it. And I look at it and I'm like,
no.
Holy crap, you're getting like 1/3 of the community estate. Are you?
Yeah.
But I've also seen the other direction. I have seen cases where people are convinced they're being screwed over.
And they're getting
and they're actually getting an incredible benefit. So I would say, really, we go to conferences all the time on this, and you be in a room of hundreds of people that do absolutely nothing but family law, and we're still taking classes and we're studying this. It's complicated, and really, you're going to need some help to sort it out. Yeah. But it might be that you have a consultation, sit down with the attorney for a little while, and we'll be able to tell you, yes, your case is complicated, or no, it's not. When do you need help and when do you don't?
Yeah, and I always say, too, like you have several lawyers at your firm.
I do.
Right? So different lawyers have different areas that they really shine in, I think.
I would agree.
Like, so we were saying earlier, she really is a good trial attorney, like really, truly. And that's not just because I'm sitting here with you. She really is a good trial attorney. And that is not something I can say about all the attorneys that we work with, right? And some attorneys hate trial, just hate it.
I would actually say most attorneys hate
it. Yes,
most attorneys don't want
people like trial.
Yeah, I live for it.
I know, but and then other attorneys feel more comfortable with the numbers. So if you have a really complicated estate, interview the attorney and make sure they're not kind of squeaming and like some attorneys just really don't feel comfortable with it, and some attorneys really it's their place. They probably have big estates. They understand. They have some of the assets you have. So I think it's important just to find your niche, your attorney niche, right? Yeah. And I like your firm because you have multiple attorneys with multiple personalities. And so there's kind of like something for everybody.
We absolutely try to be able to address the majority of.
You got the softer attorneys, you got the hard. It is nice. It is nice to have that. I think.
I think it's also really good to be able to ask. You develop areas of expertise in certain things, and it's really nice to be able to bounce off each other. So one final thing that I want to close in. I see this all the time. I hear this all the time when people come in. And they say, I don't have to worry about losing this because it's just in my name. Or I can't get that because my name's not on white. Do we care? Do we care at all?
We could care less. We could care less.
We don't care whose name it's in.
We could care less.
We don't care whose name the house is in.
We don't
care whose name the car is in.
The retirement. We don't care.
We don't care whose name.
We don't care. Inception.
If it belongs to anybody,
we can get it. Correct. I know. We can't. Inception and title.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah,
I really appreciate you coming out.